This is the story of one of the greatest ships ever built in history. This is the story of the Swedish warship Vasa. It would have been one of the strongest ships of the 17th century. Why did the Vasa sink? What were the consequences? What is Sweden? We have to explore the astonishing answers to these profound questions. But first, context. Sweden gained independence from Denmark in 1521. At the time, the country was destitute and the military was weak. But all of this dramatically changed after what Sweden calls the period of Stormaktiden, which roughly translates to the Great Power Period, when poor and destitute Sweden transformed into a rich and powerful empire. According to Sverige Tourism, Gustav Adolf was the third king of independent Sweden. He ascended to his throne in 1611. He launched Sweden into its period of great power, thanks to his reorganization of the judiciary and also thanks to his military genius, most notably for inventing portable artillery. As you may know, medieval and Renaissance Europe was characterized by almost constant war. In the 21 years that Gustav Adolf was king, he reigned in peace for just 3 years. When he ascended to his throne, Sweden was at war with Denmark, Russia, and Poland. According to the site Swedish Heart and Soul, the 30 Years' War broke out in Europe in 1618. Gustav Adolf wanted to enter the war to prevent Denmark from gaining too much power. However, he needed to conquer Poland first, whom he was at war with since the year 1600. Gustav Adolf deposed Sigismund II, elected King of Poland, from the Swedish throne. He was trying to reinstate himself as King of Sweden in this war. This is why he really needed to depose Sigismund, in order to secure his claim and preserve his honor. In this war, sea fighting was essential for Sweden to get troops to Polish territory. According to Virtual School, in the 1620s, the Swedish Navy lost 14 of their largest ships, including their flagship, the Tigran. Thus, Gustav Adolf decided to quickly replace them. At the time, the Swedish Navy had mostly small, cheap, single-deck ships, but ambitious Gustav wanted to build larger and stronger ones. In 1625, he ordered the construction of 4 ships in Stockholm, the grandest and most powerful of which was to be the Vasa. 3 years later, in August 10th, this ship set sail for her maiden voyage through a light breeze, armed with 64 guns. After just 1,300 meters, a gust of wind tipped her too far on her port side, and she sank, killing 150 people. How could this disaster have happened? Many different factors can be attributed to the Vasa's sinking, such as the fact that shipbuilding was not a written science, but rather based on a builder's past experiences, and the fact that Gustav Adolf changed the ship's measurements many times. The ship wasn't even supposed to have 2 decks, and it held 70 tons more than it should have. But we are going to focus on one specific cause: measurements. The ship was raised to the surface in 1961. It was then preserved and brought into a museum, where it still stands today. According to the PRI journal, archaeologists recently measured every single piece of wood in the ship over the course of 3 years. They found that the Vasa was asymmetrical. There was more ship structure, and thus weight, on the port side. This explains why the Vasa tipped towards her port side and sank. They also found different rulers that the shipbuilders presumably used. However, they were in 2 different systems of measurement, Amsterdam feet and Swedish feet. Using dimensional analysis, a tool for converting units of measurement that physicists use, we can analyze the information that we have and understand why the Vasa sank. In order to do that, we must analyze the information qualitatively and quantitatively. Let's begin by analyzing the information quantitatively. According to the online news journal PRI, there are roughly 12 inches in a Swedish foot and 11 inches in an Amsterdam foot. Let's put these figures into conversion factors in order to understand them better. 1 Amsterdam foot divided by 11 inches equals 1. 11 inches divided by 1 Amsterdam foot equals 1 as well. 12 inches divided by 1 Swedish foot equals 1. Finally, 1 Swedish foot divided by 12 inches is also 1. For our purposes, we need to figure out how many Swedish feet in an Amsterdam foot, or how many Amsterdam feet in a Swedish foot. Since Swedish feet have more inches than Amsterdam feet, it makes more sense to calculate how many Amsterdam feet are in a Swedish foot. Now let's put the two conversion factors from before on here. Since we know that we're trying to find Amsterdam feet per Swedish foot, the Swedish foot goes on the bottom. The inches cancel out since they repeat, then we simply cross multiply to get 12 Amsterdam feet per 11 Swedish feet. The reason why we cross out the inches is because of the same logic that occurs in multiplying 1/2 by 2/5. If we hadn't taken out the 2, the result would have been equivalent to 1/5 in any case. So, if we divide 12 Amsterdam feet by 11 Swedish feet, we get roughly 1.1 Amsterdam feet per Swedish foot. Now let's look at the qualitative side of this analysis. Let's get a very rough estimate as to how much more the port side weighed from the starboard. Keep in mind that port means left and starboard means right. Let's pretend that this is the hull of the Vasa, and that the port side is measured in Amsterdam feet while the starboard side is measured in Swedish feet. According to the site Breadband, the hull of the Vasa weighed around 1,200 tons. Ideally, the weight would be split into two equal 600-ton parts, but this is not the case. Remember that one Swedish foot is 1.1 Amsterdam feet, or 1 1/10 Amsterdam feet. So, if we multiply the weight of the port side by 1 1/10, we get an excess of 60 tons. These 60 tons have to be subtracted from the starboard side, since the number must equal 1,200 total. Thus, the port side was 120 tons heavier than the other. If this situation was what really happened, it would definitely explain why the Vasa sank. And now for the consequences. The first negative impact was economic. As you can probably imagine, the Vasa cost a lot of money. In fact, it cost 200,000 Rex dollars, or a little over 5% of the GNP of Sweden at the time. This and a huge price of the wars kept piling up, as we can see from this graph of Swedish debt history from Riksbank. Eventually, in the 1680s, the king was forced to confiscate much land given or sold to nobles as a result. As a result of Sweden's naval weakness, caused largely by the loss of the Vasa, Sweden militarily lost the Polish-Swedish War. Less than a year after the Vasa sank, Gustav Adolf had to sign a bitter peace treaty, and Sigismund II and his successors kept trying to regain the Swedish crown ever since. The Vasa disaster was also a political embarrassment for Sweden. According to an online presentation, many foreign emissaries and ambassadors were present when the Vasa set sail for the first and last time.